The Galactic Concord Assembly had stood for 4,000 years, 312 species, countless wars prevented, a monument to civilization itself. Ambassador Yusra Okonkwo had walked its halls for 15 years. She knew every corridor, every hidden garden where delegates made quiet deals, every alcove where enemies became friends over strange wines from distant worlds. She loved this place. That made what was about to happen so much worse. The session began like any other. Roll call, minor trade disputes, a proposal about shipping lane maintenance that made half the chamber fall asleep. Yusra checked her notes for the afternoon agenda. Agricultural subsidies, border markers in the Theta Quadrant. Nothing important. Then High Speaker Torvan of the Veilthrix rose to the central podium. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit. The Assembly will now consider Resolution 7291, he announced. The Terran Quarantine Doctrine. Yusra's pen stopped moving. She had not seen this resolution. No human delegate had seen this resolution. She pulled up her tablet and searched the public record. Nothing. The document appeared on her screen 3 seconds after Torvan began reading it aloud. Whereas the human species demonstrates unstable aggression markers incompatible with galactic peace, Torvan read. His voice carried no emotion. Whereas human reproductive velocity poses a statistical threat to resource allocation. Whereas humanity's military development exceeds recommended safety parameters, the words kept coming, each one a knife. Yusra looked around the chamber. The Ilarathi delegate, Counselor Veth Marin, was staring at her with something like horror on her gray face. She hadn't known either. But most of the others, they weren't surprised. They weren't even uncomfortable. They had planned this. Be it resolved, Torvan concluded, that Terran expansion shall be limited to the Sol, Proxima, and Tau Ceti systems. Human vessels shall not enter Concord space without express permission from this body. Human military assets shall be reduced by 70% within 1 standard decade. Yusra stood. The chamber went quiet. Point of order, High Speaker. Her voice was calm. She had learned long ago that calm was more frightening than shouting. When was this resolution submitted? Torvan blinked again. All 4 eyes this time. 3 days ago, Ambassador. By whom? The Veilthrix delegation, co-sponsored by the Keth Hegemony, the Ulani Federation, and 47 other member states. 50 species. 50 species had written this document in secret, had planned to vote on it before Earth could respond, before anyone could argue. And why was the human delegation not informed? Torvan's mandibles clicked, the Veilthrix equivalent of a shrug. An administrative oversight. Someone in the upper galleries laughed, a wet bubbling sound. Yusra didn't look to see who. I see, she said. She sat down. The vote took 4 minutes, 287 in favor, 24 against, 1 abstention. The abstention was humanity. They had not been given time to vote. When the final tally appeared on the central display, the chamber filled with the sound of alien celebration, mandibles clicking, throat sacs inflating, tentacles slapping against chairs. 4,000 years of civilization, and they were celebrating a trap sprung on the youngest member like it was a victory. Yusra gathered her papers, one by one, slowly. 46 human delegates watched her. They had worked with her for years. They knew that slowness. They knew what it meant. She stood again. The celebration faded into silence, not because anyone commanded it, because something in the room had changed. The air itself felt different, heavier. High Speaker, Yusra said, the human delegation wishes to make a statement for the record. Torvan gestured his permission, magnanimous in victory. Yusra looked around the chamber, at the Veilthrix in their floating chairs, at the Keth in their environmental suits, at the Ulani with their perfect silver skin and their perfect silver lies. She looked at the 24 who had voted against. The Illyrthi, the Menoth, the Broken Chain Coalition. They looked back with something like grief. "You will regret this," she said. 4 words, that was all. Then she walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the ancient stone floor. Click, click, click. The sound echoed in the silence. Behind her, 46 humans rose. They did not speak. They did not need to. They walked. The chamber doors were 3 stories tall, made from the wood of a tree that no longer existed on any world. They had not been closed in living memory. They closed behind the human delegation with a sound like a tomb ceiling. High Speaker Torvon laughed. It was too loud, too sharp. It bounced off the walls and came back as something ugly. "What can they possibly do?" he said. "They've only had faster-than-light travel for a century. They're infants." No one answered. Counselor Veth Marin was still staring at the closed doors. Her gray skin had gone pale. "You did not see her face," she said quietly. "Whose face?" "Ambassador Okonkwo, when she stood the first time, when she asked about the resolution." Torvon waved a dismissive tentacle. Shock, anger, typical primate emotion. "No," Veth Marin shook her head. She was not shocked. She was not angry. She was sad. Like she had hoped for something. Like she had been hoping for 67 years. And in that moment, she stopped. Stopped what? Veth Marin finally looked away from the doors. Her eyes met Torvan's. Hoping. The celebration did not resume. On the shuttle back to the human embassy, Yusra Okonkwo sat alone in the observation deck. Earth hung in the distance, a blue marble, fragile, beautiful. Her tablet buzzed. Message from home. She opened it. Orders received. Protocol 17 is active. God help them all. She deleted the message. Then she sat in silence and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient was stirring. Something the Concord had forgotten. Something humanity had spent 67 years preparing for, while their allies planned their cage. The galaxy thought they had contained humanity's fire. They had no idea what fire was. Not yet. 1 week after the walkout, the galaxy learned what human silence sounded like. It sounded like dying children on Velrath Prime. The Velrathi were a gentle species. Small, fragile. Their hearts grew on the outside of their bodies, protected by thin shells that cracked easily. For 30 years human surgeons had traveled to their world. They were the only ones with hands steady enough, small enough, to repair the shells of Velrathi infants. On the 8th day after the vote, the last human medical ship left orbit. "We have submitted a formal request through diplomatic channels," the Velrathi Prime Minister announced on Galactic broadcast. His voice shook. "We have received no response." 43 infants died that month. The Concord called it regrettable. On Menoth Station, the lights went dark. The Menoth were cave dwellers. For decades, humanity had supplied them with specialized light filters, a technology they had developed for their own deep space stations. They gave it freely, a gift between friends. The supply shipments stopped. 3 million Menoth waited in darkness, while their engineers scrambled to reverse-engineer technology they had never needed to understand. "Why did we never learn to make these ourselves?" one engineer asked. No one had an answer. In the Kessler Straits, the first collision happened on day 12. The straits were the fastest route between the inner colonies and the outer territories. They were also filled with debris from an ancient war, spinning metal death, waiting to shred any ship that strayed from the safe path. Humanity had cleared that path. For 40 years, their salvage crews had worked in the straits, hauling away wreckage, marking safe routes, broadcasting warnings to passing vessels. They never charged for this service. It was the neighborly thing to do, Ambassador Okonkwo had once explained to a confused Veilthrix accountant, "You don't charge neighbors for being decent." The humans stopped being neighborly. The first ship to die was a Keth freighter, 600 souls. The second was an Ulani passenger liner, 2,000 more. By the end of the month, the Straits had claimed 11 vessels. Traffic through the region dropped by 90%. Shipping costs tripled, then tripled again. The Concord called it an adjustment period. On 100 worlds, something stranger happened. The music stopped. No one had expected to love human music. It was primitive, loud, built on rhythms that matched their too fast heartbeats, and melodies that swung between joy and sorrow without warning. But somehow it had spread. Human songs played in Illyrathi meditation halls. Human films showed in Veilthrix theaters. Human stories, strange tales of heroes and monsters and love that conquered death, had become the most requested content on the Galactic Network. The humans pulled it all. Every song, every film, every story, gone overnight. "It is just entertainment," High Speaker Torvon said in his weekly address. "We have our own culture. We do not need theirs." But the silence felt wrong, like a room where someone had died, like a celebration where no one remembered to laugh. On day 20, the Illyrathi ambassador Veth Marin tried to call the human embassy on Titan. Static. She tried the embassy on Mars. Static. She tried the direct line to Ambassador Okonkwo herself, a number she had kept for 15 years, used only twice, treasured like a secret. Static. She sat in her office and stared at her communication screen. The static reflected in her black eyes, like dying stars. "What have we done?" she whispered. On day 25, the human government released a single statement. It was short, polite, devastating. "Humanity requires no allies who view us as a disease to be contained. We will remember who stood with us. We will remember who did not. We wish the Concord well in the challenges ahead." The phrase echoed across 1,000 news networks. The challenges ahead. Analysts debated its meaning. Threats, empty words, human drama? On Illyrathi Prime, Counselor Veth Marin read the statement 7 times. She had known Yusra Okonkwo for 15 years. She had watched her negotiate treaties, calm angry delegates, and turn enemies into friends, with nothing but patience and carefully chosen words. Yusra did not make empty threats. She did not engage in drama. If she said challenges ahead, she meant something specific. Veth Marin pulled up the classified archives, records of humanity's entry into the Concord, their first surveys, their early questions. One file caught her attention, a record of a human research vessel's route through the outer territories, 63 years ago. They had visited 17 systems, uninhabited, worthless, except Veth Marin cross-referenced the coordinates with older records, much older. Records from before the Concord existed. Her blood went cold. Those 17 systems were dormancy sites. Ancient warnings marked them as forbidden. "Here sleeps death," the old records said. "Do not wake it." The humans had visited every single one. Veth Marin reached for her communicator, then stopped. Who would she tell? The same assembly that had laughed as humanity walked out? The same leaders who called the medical crisis regrettable and the shipping deaths an adjustment period? She let her hand fall. On the edge of the galaxy, far beyond Concord sensors, deep space probes detected movement. Something vast, something old, something that should have slept for another 1,000 centuries. The Harrow Collective was waking. And humanity, the only species that had studied the dormancy sites, the only species that had refused to disarm, the only species that had prepared for threats no one else believed in, humanity was locked behind closed doors. 3 systems. That was all the quarantine doctrine allowed them. 3 systems, while the darkness stirred. On Earth, Yusra Okonkwo received the probe data in her private office. She read it twice. Her face showed nothing. "How long?" she asked. 8 months to first contact with Concord space, her aide replied. "Maybe less." She nodded. "And our fleet?" "Ready, hidden, waiting for your order." Yusra turned to the window. The sun was setting over the African plains. Golden light spilled across the land where her grandmother had been born. "They voted to cage us," she said quietly. "They called us a disease. They celebrated." Her aide said nothing. 24 species voted against the doctrine. 24 stood with us when it mattered. "Yes, ma'am." Yusra watched the sun sink below the horizon. The first stars appeared, cold and distant. When the Harrow come, and they will come, those 24 will be protected first. The others will learn what it means to need a friend and have none. She turned away from the window. Send no response to their calls. Let them sit in the silence they created. The door closed behind her. The galaxy had spent 67 years teaching humanity that it was alone. Humanity had learned the lesson well. The first images came from a mining colony on the edge of Keth space. Shaky footage, a worker's helmet camera. Nothing but static for the first 30 seconds. Then the sky filled with shapes. They looked like insects, metal insects the size of mountains. Their wings were solar collectors that drank light and turned it into death. Their eyes were sensors that saw heat, movement, life itself. The Harrow collective had arrived. The mining colony lasted 4 minutes. Within a week, the footage had spread to every world in the Concord. 100 billion beings watched in horror as the Harrow consumed 3 more colonies. They did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They simply ate. Metal, flesh, cities, stars. Everything was food to them. High Speaker Torvan called an emergency session of the assembly. The chamber that had celebrated humanity's containment 3 months ago now filled with the sound of panic. "We must activate the defense grid," shouted the Keth delegate. "What defense grid?" Councillor Vethmarin asked quietly. "We decommissioned it 2,000 years ago. Too expensive to maintain." "Then we build new weapons." "With what resources? Half our shipping is still paralyzed. Our supply chains are broken." The chamber erupted into chaos. Accusations flew. Old alliances shattered. The Veilthrix blamed the Ulani. The Ulani blamed the Keth. Everyone blamed everyone. No one mentioned humanity, not at first. It was the Broken Chain Coalition, a group of former slave species who had earned their freedom through centuries of patient rebellion, who finally spoke the name. "The humans warned us," their delegate said. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. 60 years ago, they submitted a report to this assembly. They said the Harrow were real. They said the dormancy was ending. They asked for funding to prepare. Silence. This assembly rejected that report, the delegate continued. "We called it human paranoia. We called it aggression seeking an outlet. We laughed at them." He looked around the chamber. "Are we laughing now?" Torvan slammed his ceremonial staff against the floor. "The humans are contained by law. The quarantine doctrine. The quarantine doctrine will not save us from extinction." The chamber fell into ugly silence. Vethmarin rose slowly from their seat. "I will go to them," she said. Every eye turned to her. "The Ilarathi voted against the doctrine. The humans may still speak to us. I will go to Earth. I will ask for their help. And if they refuse?" Vethmarin's gray face was calm. "Then we die knowing we at least tried to undo our mistake." The journey to Sol took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Harrow attacks. 3 weeks of dying colonies. 3 weeks of watching the Concord's ancient fleets crumble like paper against an enemy They had forgotten how to fight. Vethmaren's ship entered human space without incident. No one stopped her. No one greeted her. She landed on Earth, on a field of grass, outside a building of white stone. She had been here once before, long ago. A diplomatic visit, a gift exchange, laughter and wine and promises of friendship. The building looked the same. The silence felt different. A single human waited for her, a young man in a simple uniform. "Counselor Vethmaren," he said, "Ambassador Okonkwo will see you." The office was smaller than she remembered, or perhaps Yusra Okonkwo had simply grown larger. She sat behind a desk covered in papers and screens, and she looked at Vethmaren with eyes that held no warmth. "It has been a long time." "Yusra." Vethmaren tried to smile. Her face wouldn't cooperate. "You know why I've come." "Yes. The Harrow. I know about the Harrow. Billions are dying. Entire worlds. I know." Vethmaren felt something crack inside her chest. Not her shell. Something deeper. "Then help us, please. Whatever we did, whatever the Assembly did, these are innocent people, children, species who had nothing to do with the vote. They don't deserve." "Don't speak to me about what people deserve." The words hung in the air like frost. Yusra stood. She moved to the window. Outside, children were playing in a garden. Their laughter drifted through the glass. 67 years, Yusra said. "We spent 67 years trying to be good neighbors. We cleared your shipping lanes. We trained your doctors. We gave you our music, our stories, our dreams. We asked for nothing in return, except friendship." She turned back. "And when we asked for help, preparing against a threat we had proven was real, you laughed. When we asked to be treated as equals, you caged us. When we walked away with dignity instead of violence, you celebrated." "I didn't celebrate." Vethmaren's voice broke. "I voted against." "I know." Something softened in Yusra's face, just for a moment. "I know you did. You and 23 others. That is why you are standing in my office, instead of speaking to a recording." She returned to her desk. "The quarantine doctrine remains in effect. We are contained to 3 systems. We will defend those 3 systems. We will not violate galactic law." However, Yusra's voice carried a new weight. If the Concord were to repeal the doctrine, if the Assembly were to formally acknowledge that humanity was wronged, if certain assurances were provided. Secrecy, what assurances? Yusra handed her a data chip. "Our terms, non-negotiable. Bring them to the Assembly. Let them vote." Vethmaren took the chip. Her hands were shaking. "And if they refuse?" Yusra's smile was the saddest thing Vethmaren had ever seen. "Then we will sit in our 3 systems and watch. We will mourn you, Veth. I will mourn you personally. You are the closest thing to a friend I had in that chamber." She looked away. "But we will not burn for people who caged us. Not without a price. Not this time." Vethmaren left Earth with the data chip pressed against her chest. Behind her, the blue planet shrank in the viewport. Beautiful. Terrible. On the long journey home, she opened the file and read humanity's demands. When she finished, she wept. Not because the terms were cruel, not because they were impossible, because they were fair. And fairness, after everything the Concord had done, felt like the cruelest thing of all. The assembly chamber was full for the first time in centuries. Every species had sent their leaders. Not delegates, not ambassadors, leaders. Prime ministers and high priests and hive queens crowded into seats built for lesser beings. The air smelled of fear and strange perfumes. Counselor Vethmaren stood at the central podium. The data chip felt heavy in her hand. "I have returned from Earth," she began. "The humans have agreed to help us." The chamber erupted in relief. Cheers, tentacles waving, throat sacs inflating with joy. "There are conditions." The cheers died. Vethmaren activated the display. Humanity's terms appeared in cold blue light. translated into 300 languages simultaneously. First, complete and immediate repeal of the Terran quarantine doctrine. Murmurs, nods, expected. Second, humanity will be granted permanent veto power over any legislation that affects Terran interests. No appeals. The murmurs grew louder. Angry now. Veto power? That's what we should have given them from the start, Vethmaren cut in. We gave it to the founding species. We gave it to the Keth when they threatened to leave 100 years ago. We denied it to humanity because we thought they were too young, too primitive. She let that word hang in the air. Third, a formal apology, broadcast to every world. The Concord will admit that humanity was wronged, that the quarantine doctrine was passed through deception, that we betrayed allies who had given us nothing but friendship. High Speaker Torvon rose from his seat. His 4 eyes blazed with fury. This is extortion. They're holding the galaxy hostage. Yes. Vethmaren's voice was calm. And we gave them the hostage. We built the cage. We handed them the key to our survival and told them their lives didn't matter. This is what that looks like from the other side. The Ulani delegate stood, her silver face twisted with contempt. And if we refuse these humiliating terms, what then? Will humanity let the Harrow destroy us all out of spite? The display changed. New data, star charts, fleet positions. This is the human military, Vethmaren said, as of this morning. The chamber went silent. The map showed 3 systems, Sol, Proxima, and Talseti, surrounded by a ring of ships. Thousands of ships. Ships the Concord sensors had never detected. Ships built in secret shipyards beyond the borders of known space. But that wasn't the worst part. The display zoomed out, beyond the 3 systems, beyond Concord territory, to the edges of the galaxy itself. More ships, positioned at every major Harrow approach vector, waiting. For 67 years, Vethmaren said softly, humanity has been preparing for this war. They studied the Harrow, while we pretended the threat didn't exist. They built weapons, while we decommissioned ours. They trained soldiers, while we trained accountants. She turned to face the assembly. They could have fought this war alone, defended their 3 systems, and let us burn. It would have been justice. By our own laws, by the doctrine we forced on them, they had no obligation to help us. Her voice hardened. But they are offering to save us. All of us. Even the species that voted for their cage. All they ask in return is an apology and the right to never be betrayed again. She stepped back from the podium. If that is extortion, then I do not know what mercy is. The debate lasted 9 hours. The Veilthrix argued that veto power would make humanity too strong. The Keth demanded modifications to the apology language. The Ulani suggested counter-proposals, amendments, compromises. One by one, they fell silent. Because while they argued, the Harrow took 3 more systems. Because the death toll climbed past 10 billion. Because the ancient enemy that should have slept for another millennium was awake and hungry. And the only species that could stop it was sitting in 3 tiny systems, waiting for an apology. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The Concord accepted humanity's terms. The broadcast went out that same hour. High Speaker Torvon stood before a camera drone and read the words that would echo across 1,000 worlds. The Galactic Concord formally acknowledges that the Terran quarantine doctrine was passed through deliberate deception. We acknowledge that humanity was denied representation. We acknowledge that our actions constituted a betrayal of a member species whose only crime was trusting us. His mandibles clicked with each word, the sound of humiliation. We apologize, unreservedly. We ask humanity's forgiveness, though we have no right to expect it. The broadcast ended. On Earth, in an office overlooking the African plains, Yusra Okonkwo watched the replay 3 times. Her face showed nothing. "Well," said her aide, "they did it." "Yes. The fleet is asking for orders." Yusra stood. She walked to the window. The sun was rising. Golden light spilled across the land, where her grandmother had been born, where her grandfather had fought in wars no one remembered anymore. "When I was a girl," she said, "my grandmother told me a story about a man who was beaten by his neighbors, left for dead in the road. Years later, those same neighbors came to him starving, begging for food. Her aide waited. The man fed them, not because they deserved it, not because he had forgotten what they did, but because he refused to become the kind of person who could watch others starve." She turned away from the window. "We are not monsters. We will never be monsters. That is not who humanity is." She picked up her communicator. "But we will also never forget. We will remember every species that voted for our cage. We will remember every laugh, every celebration, every quiet satisfaction at our humiliation. We will be their saviors." Her voice dropped. "And they will live the rest of their existence, knowing they needed us, knowing we came anyway, knowing they can never ever repay that debt." She activated the communicator. "Deploy the fleet. Priority defense for the 24 species who voted against the doctrine. Everyone else can wait their turn." The order went out. Across the galaxy, human ships moved like a wave of fire toward the darkness. The Harrow would learn what humanity was. So would everyone else. The war lasted 11 years. It began in fire and ended in silence. The Harrow Collective had consumed 3 galaxies before entering their long sleep. They had devoured civilizations that made the Concord look like children playing with sticks. They had never been stopped. They had never met humanity. The first battle took place in the Menoth system. A Harrow swarm of 40,000 units against a human fleet of 200 ships. The Concord watched from a safe distance. They expected to see humanity crushed, a noble sacrifice, brave but doomed. What they saw instead changed everything. Human ships did not fight like Concord vessels. They did not maintain formation. They did not preserve themselves. They flew directly into the swarm and detonated. Not randomly. Each explosion was calculated. Each suicide run took out a command node, a processing center, a weak point in the collective's network. The humans adapted faster. When the battle ended, the swarm was gone. 93 human ships remained. The survivors did not celebrate. They refueled, rearmed, and moved to the next battle. Year after year, system after system, the Harrow learned to fear human ships. They had never feared anything before. But these small vessels, crewed by soft creatures who lived barely a century, fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they didn't. Human soldiers recorded messages for their families before every mission. They went anyway. "Tell my daughter I love her," said a pilot moments before ramming his fighter into a Harrow dreadnought. "I'm sorry I missed your wedding," said a captain as her cruiser's reactor went critical inside an enemy mothership. "Humanity remembers," said a Marine as he triggered the bomb that vaporized himself and 10,000 Harrow drones. These recordings spread across the galaxy. Billions watched. Billions wept. Not for the humans, for themselves, for what they had almost lost, for what they had treated as a disease to be contained. The turning point came in Year 7, the Harrow Collective Prime. The central intelligence that controlled all the swarms had been located. It hid in a dead galaxy, surrounded by defenses that had destroyed 100 civilizations. Admiral James Okonkwo, grandson of Yusra, led the assault. 3,000 human ships, 20 million soldiers, against a fortress that had never been breached. The battle lasted 9 days. On the 9th day, Admiral Okonkwo broadcast a single message to the Collective Prime. "You have eaten 3 galaxies. You have destroyed species beyond counting. You believe you are inevitable, unstoppable, that all things become your food in the end. His fleet was burning. Half his ships were gone. The fortress's defenses were finally weakening, but not fast enough. You are wrong. He ordered the final charge. 1,200 ships flew directly into the Collective Prime's core. They carried no weapons, only passengers, volunteers. Each one had uploaded their consciousness into the ship's computer. Each one had chosen to die not just once, but forever. Their minds would merge with the Collective Prime's network. They would become a virus of human will inside an alien machine god. They would tear it apart from within. Across the galaxy, every Harrow drone stopped moving. Then they began to self-destruct. It took 4 more years to hunt down the survivors. 4 more years of battles and losses and sacrifice. But the outcome was never in doubt. On Victory Day, the Galactic Concord gathered in the assembly chamber. 312 species, the same chamber where humanity had walked out 11 years ago. The doors opened. Yusra Okonkwo entered. She was old now. Gray hair, deep lines around her eyes. She walked with a cane, but she walked. Behind her came the survivors, human veterans by the thousands, missing limbs, scarred faces, haunted eyes. The assembly rose, not by command, not by tradition. They simply rose. Every species, every representative, a standing silence that said more than words ever could. Yusra made her way to the podium, the same podium where she had spoken 4 words and walked out. The same podium where the galaxy had learned to fear human silence. She looked out at the gathered species. You asked us once what made humanity dangerous, she said. Her voice was soft. It didn't need to be loud. The chamber was silent enough to hear a heartbeat. You called it unstable aggression. You called it concerning reproductive velocity. Big words for things you did not understand. She paused. I will tell you what humanity is. The chamber waited. We are the species that looks at the impossible and says, not yet. We are the species that refuses to accept limits because someone tells us they exist. We dream of things that cannot be, and then we build them. Her hands tightened on the podium. We are the species that bonds with anything, with animals, with machines, with strangers we will never meet again. We adopt, we protect. We love things that cannot love us back. And we do it anyway, because that is who we are. Her voice cracked. She steadied herself. We are the species that will burn ourselves to ash to protect what we love. Not because we are aggressive, not because we are unstable, because we care so much that we cannot imagine not fighting for it. She looked directly at the Veilthrix delegation, at the Keth, at the Ulani, at all the species who had voted for her people's cage. You are what we love, she said. You always were, even when you forgot it, even when you hurt us, even when you celebrated our humiliation and called us a disease. Tears ran down her weathered face. She did not wipe them away. We could have let you burn. We could have watched from our 3 systems and said, you deserved it. Part of us wanted to. I wanted to. She shook her head. But that is not who humanity is. We are the species that saves our enemies. We are the species that forgives what cannot be forgiven. We are the species that believes, against all evidence, against all reason, that the future can be better than the past. She stepped back from the podium. 7 billion humans died in this war. 7 billion. Say that number. Remember it. Not as a debt you owe us, but as proof of what we were willing to sacrifice for a galaxy that tried to cage us. The chamber was silent. We saved you, not for payment, not for power, not even for respect. She turned to leave. We saved you because you needed saving, because that is what humanity does. The doors opened for her. Golden light spilled into the chamber from the windows beyond. She walked toward it, surrounded by her veterans, leaving the assembly in silence. Counselor Vethmaren stood alone at her seat. Tears streamed down her gray face. "I understand now," she whispered to no one. "I finally understand." On the steps of the assembly building, Yusra Okonkwo stopped. She looked up at the sky, at the stars that humanity had fought and died for. "Was it worth it?" her grandson asked. He stood beside her in his admiral's uniform, missing his left arm, carrying his own scars. Yusra watched the stars. "Ask me in 100 years," she said. "Ask me when we see what they do with the second chance we gave them." She took his hand. "Ask me when we see if they learned anything at all." They walked together into the light. Behind them, the galaxy began the long work of remembering, of becoming worthy of the species that had saved them. Some would succeed, some would fail, but all of them, every last one, would remember. The humans stormed out of the assembly, and then they stormed back in to save everyone anyway. That was what humanity was. That was what it would always be.